In the early hours of December 7th, 1941, while the inhabitants of Hawaii enjoyed a peaceful Sunday, the world was about to change forever. The skies darkened with Japanese planes that, in a devastating surprise attack, unleashed one of the most dramatic and tragic events of World War II, the attack on Pearl Harbor. This event, which involved hundreds of planes from the Imperial Japanese Navy, not only resulted in the loss of human lives, but also pushed the previously neutral United States to become directly involved in the global conflict. But how did we get to this point? What led Japan to carry out such a bold and risky attack? To fully understand why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, it is essential to go back several decades in history. In the latter half of the 19th century, Japan was undergoing rapid modernization known as the Meiji Restoration. This period, which began in 1868, transformed Japan from a feudal nation ruled by samurais and shoguns into an industrial and military power that would soon compete with the major Western nations. Japan sought to expand territorially to obtain the natural resources needed to sustain its growing economy. However, its rapid rise also created tensions in Asia and with Western powers. One of the first signs of Japan's imperial ambitions was its war with China in 1894 to 1895, known as the First Sino-Japanese War. Japan defeated China and secured control over Korea and Taiwan. This victory was an indication that Japan was willing to use military force to expand its influence. Subsequently, Japan continued its expansion with the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, where it again emerged victorious, consolidating its dominance over Manchuria and extending its power in northeastern Asia. By defeating a Western power like Russia, Japan sent a clear signal that it was emerging as a new player in global politics. Despite these successes, Japan remained dependent on imports, particularly for essential raw materials like oil, iron, and rubber. In the early decades of the 20th century, Japan began to look towards Southeast Asia, a region rich in natural resources, as a potential source to sustain its growth. However, there was a problem. The United States and other Western powers also had interests in the region, and any Japanese attempt to expand into Southeast Asia would likely trigger a conflict. Furthermore, the global situation was complex. Europe was mired in World War II, and European powers like Britain and France were focused on their own conflicts, leaving their colonies in Asia more vulnerable to Japanese ambitions. In this context, Japan began to seek strategic alliances to strengthen its position. In 1940, it signed the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy, forming the Axis. This alliance was not only aimed at deterring Western powers from interfering in Japan's expansion plans in Asia, but also provided diplomatic and military backing in the event of a large-scale conflict. The Tripartite Pact also had a significant strategic implication. It aligned Japan with two European powers with which Japan shared military and expansionist interests, creating a united front against the Allied powers, especially the United States and its allies. Italy and Germany, led by Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler respectively, had their own objectives in Europe. Italy, under Mussolini, sought to expand its influence in the Mediterranean and North Africa, while Germany, under Hitler, pursued aggressive expansionism in Eastern Europe. This alliance allowed Japan to not only consolidate its position in Asia, but also coordinate its efforts with the Axis powers to maximize pressure on the Allies on multiple fronts. The Tripartite Pact, in essence, expanded the theater of war, linking conflicts in Asia and Europe. However, the alliance also had a cost. The relationship between Japan and Germany, although based on common interests, was not always smooth. Strategic differences and national objectives sometimes led to tensions. For example, while Japan focused on Asia and the Pacific, Germany was more focused on Europe and the Mediterranean. Despite these tensions, cooperation in intelligence and coordination of military operations helped strengthen the alliance on the global front. In 1931, Japan invaded and occupied Manchuria, establishing a puppet state known as Manchukuo. This was a significant step in its territorial expansion, but also provoked international condemnation. The League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations, condemned the invasion, and Japan responded by withdrawing from the organization. This act marked a turning point in Japanese foreign policy, which was now completely focused on military expansion regardless of international criticism. In 1937, Japan launched a large-scale invasion of China, resulting in the Second Sino-Japanese War, a brutal conflict that included atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians were killed by Japanese troops. These acts not only provoked global outrage, but also intensified tensions with the United States, which condemned Japanese aggression. In 1938, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed the U.S. Congress and expressed concern about Japanese aggression in China, highlighting the need for an international response to maintain peace in Asia. This stance became a crucial factor in U.S. policy towards Japan. The United States began to impose economic sanctions and an arms embargo on Japan, including the prohibition of oil exports and other vital resources. These sanctions, combined with growing hostility between the Axis powers and the Allies, led Japan to consider a more aggressive strategy to secure its objectives. At this point, Japan faced an existential dilemma. If it could not secure access to the natural resources needed to sustain its expansion, its economy and military machinery would collapse. At the same time, U.S. sanctions had closed the door to a diplomatic solution. Faced with this situation, Japan decided that there was only one option: to secure control over Southeast Asian resources, particularly the rich oil reserves of the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia. However, this plan presented a problem: the U.S. Pacific Fleet, stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. To secure its expansion in Southeast Asia, Japan needed to neutralize the threat posed by the Pacific Fleet. The logic behind the attack on Pearl Harbor was simple. If Japan could destroy the U.S. fleet in a swift and decisive attack, it would gain the time needed to consolidate its control over Southeast Asia and the resources it needed. The plan was conceived by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who had spent time in the United States and understood the country's industrial capacity. Yamamoto knew that if the United States decided to go to war, it could outproduce Japan in terms of military production. However, he also believed that a rapid and devastating attack could demoralize the United States and force it to negotiate a peace favorable to Japan. The attack was meticulously planned over several months. The Japanese designed special torpedoes to adapt to the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor, which averaged only 12 meters in depth, making conventional torpedoes difficult to use. Additionally, detailed drills were conducted to ensure that pilots were well prepared for the attack. At 7:48 a.m. on December 7, 1941, the first wave of Japanese planes, consisting of bombers, fighters, and torpedo planes, reached Pearl Harbor. For nearly 2 hours, Japanese planes wreaked havoc on the naval base. The USS Arizona was struck by a bomb that penetrated its deck and exploded in an ammunition storage area, causing a massive explosion that sank the battleship within minutes, killing 1,177 of its crew members. Other battleships, such as the USS Oklahoma and USS West Virginia, were also severely damaged or sunk. The Japanese destroyed more than 180 American planes and caused significant damage to the naval base. In total, 2,403 Americans were killed in the attack, and another 1,178 were injured. Despite the initial success of the attack, the Japanese failed to destroy the American aircraft carriers, which were out of the base at the time of the attack. This would be a key factor in subsequent battles in the Pacific, where aircraft carriers would play a crucial role. Additionally, the fuel depots and repair facilities at Pearl Harbor remained intact, allowing the United States to recover quickly from the attack. Although Japan had inflicted a devastating blow, it had not managed to completely incapacitate the U.S. military's capacity in the Pacific. The attack on Pearl Harbor prompted an immediate reaction in the United States. On December 8th, President Roosevelt addressed Congress and the American people in a historic speech, calling December 7th a date that will live in infamy. In his speech, Roosevelt stated, "December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. The United States was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. With overwhelming support from Congress, the United States declared war on Japan that same day. 3 days later, Germany and Italy, Japan's allies in the Tripartite Pact, declared war on the United States, leading to U.S. involvement in the war in Europe as well. What followed the attack on Pearl Harbor was a total war in the Pacific, a series of fierce battles that would culminate in Japan's eventual defeat. The attack on Pearl Harbor, rather than demoralizing the United States, united the nation in its determination to win the war. In the following years, American industry ramped up its production of war material, far surpassing Japan's ability to sustain the war. The Allies' island-hopping strategy, which involved capturing key islands in the Pacific, allowed the United States to gradually approach Japanese territory. In the long term, relations between Japan and the United States were completely transformed. After the war, Japan was occupied by U.S. forces and its government was restructured. Japan renounced its war-making capabilities and adopted a pacifist constitution under the supervision of General Douglas MacArthur. During the Cold War, Japan became a strategic ally of the United States in Asia, contrasting with its role as an enemy during World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor also had a lasting impact on global geopolitics. U.S. participation in World War II accelerated the collapse of the Axis powers and contributed to the defeat of Germany and Italy in Europe. In Asia, the Pacific War led to Japan's eventual surrender in 1945. Following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the end of World War II marked the beginning of a new era in international politics, with the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as dominant superpowers and the onset of the Cold War. In conclusion, the attack on Pearl Harbor was a turning point not only for the United States, but for the entire world. Although devastating in the short term, it also marked the beginning of the end for the Japanese Empire, which could not withstand the military and industrial might of the United States. Pearl Harbor remains a reminder of the destructive power of war, but also of the capacity of nations to overcome adversity and emerge stronger.